Well, we've decided, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we've decided I'm going to do my bit first, and Des will do his bit. And my bit will be really concerned with where we came from. And that's why we have a picture of where we were born and reared. I did that painting from a photograph. Most of you would know Henry Noonan. Henry Noonan bought that place in 2002. And you can hardly get into the place now with cars. He built a few extra houses and he restored the house. That house was built in around 1840. And in the distance there, the middle building that you see there was a watermill. And the other building then to the left was called the ware room, because the people, original owners of that place, the Fortune brothers, had a woolen mill about half a mile down the river. The river comes down by the house there. And they used to bring their blankets and things they produced up to the ware room, and that's where they sold the stuff from. And even in our time, we still called it the ware room. So the name of the town's land is Brown's Castle, because there's a castle to the right of the avenue up high on the hill. And it was a Norman castle, and it's about half the height now as it was originally, but we used to play up there, and it was an intriguing sort of place. So I'm going to try and fit in 24 photographs and say something about each of them in half an hour. So it'll be a little bit rushed, but I want you all to remember that the photographs and things that we're showing here, most of them were taken by ourselves, box cameras, you know, very poor standard. So don't expect great technology in everything we do here, because we must say, I could say to you, there were 4 in our family, and all 4 of us are still alive. We have 2 sisters, and there's 2 of us, and we're all in our 80s. Some more into the 80s than others. That's the young fella. He's the youngest. So anyhow, we're all very glad to be still alive and reasonably well. Now, I'll take away this. We have to get used to operating this machine. And this is another painting I did from a photograph, and that shows you the river that passed down by the house, and that's the bridge. And the road that crosses over that bridge goes from the local village of Timon to Enniscorthy. And that at one time was a fairly main road. But we used the river, we made a boat when we were young fellas, and we used to fish a lot. And the time to fish in that river was when you had a lot of rain and the water was muddy. And then you could fish with the worm, and we often were able to land 5 or 6 fishes with each flood. So we always loved to see the floods come. Now, our grandfather, he was also James Cullen, and that was his emporium in the village of Timon, and he was a general factotum, a bar and hardware and everything. And he even had his own brand of whiskey. Now that was probably that picture was probably made about 1880 or thereabouts. So that's the background there. Now, we'll get down to showing a few cars. That photograph was taken about 1928, and my father had just got this Rover 8 air-cooled twin. As most of the Gordon Bennett people would know, I got one of these subsequently, not that car, but. And I remember that quite well. It was the first car I remember. And why I remembered so well, for one reason, was I remember at some stage my mother told me to go out and call my father into his tea. And what was he doing? He had a big pot of red paint, and he was painting Rover. That's the restoration he did. So it was a great little car, interesting car. Our second car, and I remember this reasonably well, was a Vulcan 12. Unfortunately, the only thing I have from that car is the masket. You see the masket there on the bonnet, and that's the Vulcan was the god of fire, and he was always represented with an anvil, and that is the masket. The two ladies were relations, and the dog was my first memory of a dog we had was he's Kerry Blue called Bruno. Now we have another interesting one here. This was the first bit of motorsport that I saw, and that was on the Strand in Duncannon, which is in the on the Wexford side of Waterford Harbour. And they held races there for 3 years, I think 28, 29 and 31. And most of the competitors were locals, and they drove their Model A Fords and Morris Cowleys and things like that. And one of the well-known people in those races was a Statham from Kilkenny, and his sons subsequently were into motorsport in the 50s. They used to do the Circuit of Ireland. But I was 4 when that event took part. Now, I always regret that we didn't have photographs of all the cars my father had, and he had a lot of cars, but I've only scraps of information. There's probably the most modern car we had. It's a Model Y Ford 1936, and that was the first car I ever drove when I was 10. Illegally, of course. We used to have friends visiting us from Dublin, and this photograph was taken in 1925 in Brown's Castle, and the car, anyone guess what make of car that was? It's a French car, a Charon, C-H-A-R-L. This is just a shot back to 1936. Now, pick me out of that. I'm on the left, my father's behind me, Des is here, the little fella, and my two sisters on the right. The other two girls or children there were relations from Wexford. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now there's another view of Brown's Castle, and that's the bridge, and the river is passing underneath. That was our garden, a few apple trees, and that's the house there in the back. This is just a quick shot of our family. On the left is my sister Gabriel Norton, then there's Des, Carmel Berry, who still lives in Wexford, and myself. Now, at this stage I'm going to jump. We lived there until 1946, when my father had enough of farming. He was never really a barn farmer. He inherited the place on about 100 acres. And the building I showed you there, the mill, there was a mill, a water mill, which he got married in 1923. He got the mill going, and we ground corn for the farmers around the place to make meal for feeding. And I remember I had a book of the mill, the accounts, and the farmers then would pay once a year for their grinding. And a good farmer would pay about a £5 a year for the grinding. They were charging a penny a stone for grinding meal, and a halfpenny extra if you wanted it dried. We had a kiln as well. So I remember well in the early 30s, when everyone else was busy, I'd be sent out to the mill to look after it, to be sure that there was corn getting into the hopper and being ground, and that the bags were taken away when they were full. So I was into very rudimentary engineering scene there with water milling gears and all the rest.
You didn't show that.
Sorry?
You didn't show that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we're now in the Dublin situation, and this is an early picture of me with a DKW, 1954 DKW, and we were at the Corkscrew Hilltime in County Clare. And on the Saturday, that was on a Sunday, on the Saturday before, we had been up at the Ulster Grand Prix. So we travelled a fair bit in those days. I didn't particularly like, that car was I only had 13,000 miles when I bought it. And I only kept it for a few months because I found the suspension was too hard and I had a bad back, and I got rid of it again. Now, here's an interesting shot of a Rover 8 that I got for nothing in 1965, and had a big job restoring it. First thing I had to do was collect bits and pieces which were missing. And at that point, in 1965, I joined the IVVCC, and I got interested then in the older cars. So I decided, my father having had a Rover 8, I'd like to have this one. So we moved to Dublin in 1969, and the car was just a rolling thing at the time. It wasn't going. And in '69, the IVVCC decided they were going to have a rally to France in 1971. So coming up to Christmas of '69, I was searching around for a car that I could bring to France. And I was talking to John's dad, Jim Cullen, about it. I said, "Do you have a car? Why don't you restore it?" So with a lot of help from Jim and other people, I started. I remember starting in January to have the car ready in May for a trip to France. And the first trial run I did in the car was a fortnight before leaving for France. Now, it was very interesting that the club that time were very scary about people entering to go to France because they weren't sure what sort of a car they'd have. So I was in great trepidation, waiting for Bill Pegham and somebody else to come and have a look at my restoration. So they let me go, and I went to France and got back in the little Rover 8. And I used that in most of the Gordon Bennetts from 1974 up to 1995. And I tried to sell it here. Nobody in Ireland even made me an offer on it. And eventually an Englishman from Wales bought it. So that's where it is now. Now, the next car I got around the same time, in 1965, was quite an interesting car. You've probably heard of Steer tractors, Austrian make. And the bottom picture was a picture of that actual car at the Berlin show in 1933. It was on the newsstand, NEUSS, with the bodybuilders. And above it there you could see it with my daughter Deirdre and our dog in 1965. And I remember doing a rally to Athlone in that. And it was 6-cylinder, very rare car altogether. Eventually, it needed a lot of restoration, which there was a lot of woodwork in that, and I wouldn't have been capable. So I sold it to a farmer down in Kilkenny who put it into a bad house and did nothing with it, and answered an ad from an Englishman in Essex called John Logue, who came over and he bought it. And he brought it back to Essex and did a big restoration on it. Spent an awful lot of money on it. It turned out that that was a most rare steer, 2-litre, 6-cylinder steer. And eventually he had a bit of trouble with the engine and he decided to sell it. And I remember seeing it in Coys of Kensington at some stage. They were looking for £5,000 for it. So it eventually made its way back to Berlin, where I had a letter from an architect in Berlin who was building a new museum, car museum in Berlin, and he had got the car and he was asking me to give all the details I could about it. So that car is probably still in Berlin. So it's the one that got away in a way, but it was more than I could handle. There's another picture of that car in an IVVC rally in I think it would have been about 64, and it was a cabriolet, two-seater with a back seat that was across the back, and then it had a boot. But it was an unusual car. Now, at this stage, there's a photograph of the Rover having been restored and ready to go on the French rally in 1970. And the rally was sponsored by the ferries that went from Rosslare to Le Havre, and we had free travel over and free travel back. People had cars for nothing. And Esso also sponsored all the petrol for it. And the week we were in France, all we had to pay ourselves was for 2 nights bed and breakfast. The rest was all sponsored. And we finished up in the museum in Le Mans. I did my first circuit. I did 10 circuits of Ireland, and Des did probably the same number, but at different times. And the first circuit I did was with a chap from Gorey in a 100E Ford in 19. So that Bernadette should be interested in that car because her husband bought it. I sold it. I bought it, kept it a year, and sold it to somebody out in County Kildare. And it ended up, I think, through Jim Boland, and her husband bought it from Jim Boland.
Never raced or rallied to.
LIK 123 was the number. So it was at the 56. And I think I paid.
Don't tell Ben.
Don't tell me because
I forget what I paid for it, but it was very cheap on it. But,
Probably didn't tell you the truth anyway.
I sold it after a year, and I did a trip to France in it, and I did the Circuit of Ireland in that same year, and we finished 10th overall, 4th in our class, and won the novice award. So that was our first, in 1958, our first real go at the circuit. Then after that, we did the circuit in another Beetle, an ex-Kevin Sherry car, and in 59 we were 6th overall in the circuits, and the first 7 cars were Volkswagens. And there was a big ad, MDL put in a big ad, Circuit of Ireland, first 7 races. So we were delighted with this, and they threw a big dinner for us in the Shelburne. So that's what we got out of it. Now, I don't know whether you remember the Toaster. And there's a photograph of me driving a Ford Special, which we called Culford, C-U-L-F-O-R-D, Cullen Ford. So that was in a driving test in Dunleary. There's another one of the same car, the front view, in a Kilkenny trial. Around this time, we were doing a lot of travelling to test trials in Kilkenny, Waterford, and in in Carrick-on-Suir. And these were great events. They were sort of, you'd move from place to place around the country doing tests. favourite test was driving around creameries and see who got around quickest. It was all against the clock. I forgot to mention that when we moved to Dublin, Des and I were in boarding school in Wexford, and we moved to Dublin from the college. I had done the leaving, and in '46 I went to UCD and did engineering. My engineering came a bit slow because that was the time when Des was doing a lot of competitions on bikes, and I remember he'd show you a photograph of himself in the Skerries 100 in 1952, and he was doing quite well, but he came off. So I should have been studying for my finals, but instead of that I was trying to keep this fella going. So I didn't get my final, I had to repeat it. So that's the story of my life. Now there's another shot. It's a 59-1. The second car there is a Delo, and that's Des Bradley, the late Des Bradley. The next man there is I can't think of his name now, and then I'm the next one with my NSU. I had an NSU as well. And the last man there is Brian Carlo, who did a lot of rallying with Volkswagen. How are we going? Quick enough. Now, there's a shot from one of the I think it was a 1979 Gordon Bennett, and John Barrow, who was secretary of the IVCT for a good few years, now lives up in Donegal, but he drove and I navigated, and our daughter Deirdre is in the booth there. But we did all the Gordon Bennetts from about 74 until 95 in that little car, but I never managed to win the rally. And a few times I think I was third overall. That was the best I ever did. But we won the 1000cc class a few times. So we were getting small encouragements. That's another car that I brought in 1971. It's a Lee Francis Tourer, 1933. That car was very well known. It was owned by a pharmacist who had a shop in O'Connell Street. And when I was going to UCD, I often saw that car on the road. And the owner lived in Eglinton Road. And eventually, when he sold it to one of the roaches, of Roadstone roaches, and I eventually then bought it from him. He had stopped using it. And there's another car I had, a 1937 Riley Falcon, from 74 to 94. One of my favourite cars, a very good car. And did a trip to France and a lot of other rallies and things. My dear wife was my navigator in those days, and she was good. So we have a few couples to prove it. Now, another little bit of sport, mud plugging. Around 1977, we decided we'd have a go at this, and we did a few seasons in it with it, and it was very enjoyable, but very hard, dirty work. But now the cars are much more sophisticated, so that was a Volkswagen special. Then this is another car I bought. it's an A40, 1952 A40, and I bought it around 1973 or 4, and I had it for a good few years, and eventually I sold it and to
Joe Clark.
Joe Clark. Joe Clark bought it, and he had worked on that car as a mechanic in, who were there?
That's in Westbrook.
Westbrook, yeah. And Joe thought he should have it, so he bought it from me, and he put it away somewhere and started dismantling it, and somehow or other a scrap man came in and cleared away all the bits and pieces, so I think the car is there, but a whole lot of pieces, so I don't know what's going to happen.
I found the doors for it.
Did they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is on its way back.
Oh, good, good. I'd love to see it. Now, again, looking back at my old cars, that was the first vehicle of 12 that I had in my career, and that was a 1953 one that I bought second hand, just only 6 months old, from P.R. Riley's in Hoth Road, from, who would you say? Frank Key. Frank Key was a salesman at P.R. Riley's, and he sold me that car.
Was she in crash box?
Sorry?
Was she a crash box?
No, that was the start of the Synchros.
Certainly.
Yeah. And she had the split back window.
Yeah.
Very valuable now. But I only bought one of the 12 Volkswagens. I only bought one new one in 1956, EIK 818, and I bought it in Ballsbridge Motors. And who did I buy it from? Paddy Hopker, who's a salesman. And Paddy, when he was doing the deal with me, I had traded in another Volkswagen. There was a youth walking around, and I said to Paddy, who's your man? Oh, he says, I'm training him in Nigel O'Flaherty. So I bought my car from famous people. And finally, no, there's a few more cars. That's the A40 Sports again, and it was a grand car. It was basically it was based on the Somerset, but it had a column gear change. It was a good car, comfortable. Here's a photograph of a group of people. This car that's in that won the Gordon Bennett in 2002. One of the Shanes from Wicklow. And we're handing over a cheque that we made. It was a picture I did, one of my Gordon Bennett pictures. Most of my pictures were raffled, and we gave the proceeds to different charities. Usually do 3 per year, per charity, and then we changed something else. But that was for the Alzheimer's, and it was the Alzheimer's group in, where was it? In Avoca. Because my eldest sister's husband had Alzheimer's, and he was looked after in Avoca, and this is why we gave him some help. And that picture in 2002 made 2,700. So that was a good contribution. And then there's another one here, handing over a check to the Samaritans director. Again, it was for a picture that was raffled. So we handed them over 1,500. And finally, there's one of the garden ballot pictures that I did annually. That one was the last, no, it wasn't quite the last, 2008. The last picture I did was for last year's. So that's my little bit. Hand you over to the fast man now.